Hello, everybody out there in LinkedIn and YouTube live land. It's Dr. Caroline Brookfield here with another episode of Creative Lifescaping. And I am so excited to bring Mr. Mark Metry to the show. I met Mark on LinkedIn, which is a great platform to meet people you wouldn't otherwise meet. Mark is a 24-year-old entrepreneur, author, creator, mental health advocate, coach, teacher, keynote speaker, podcast host, and loving human being. And he's also a meditator, which we were just chatting about before I popped on here. Now, Mark hosts the Social Anxiety Social Podcast, is the best-selling author of Screw Being Shy, Learn How to Manage Social Anxiety and Be Yourself in Front of Anyone, which is it really speaks to me because I feel like creativity correlates with that too. So welcome, Mark. Thank you so much for joining me.
Caroline, thank you so much for having me. And I appreciate all your work in the creativity field. I'm excited.
Thank you. And I'm so excited to dive into, your thoughts on creativity. In your website, you talk about being an entrepreneur at 7 years old. So maybe I know your story, but maybe share a little bit about your story growing up and how entrepreneurship and creativity, intersected with your social anxiety.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I honestly never thought about it. But, for example, for me, like my parents, they immigrated from Egypt to the US. And I never really had a lot of money growing up. And so I remember being a little kid in school. And I remember, going to lunch and, for example, getting like the government subsidized lunch, which didn't really include cookies. And I remember I was like, man, I really want a cookie. And all these different friends that I had cookies. And so I would just like started thinking like, what can I do to afford a cookie? And so I remember at that time, baseball cards were like a thing. They were popping off. And I obviously didn't have access to buy baseball cards. And so what I would do is I would just find like random newspapers and I would go to the sports section and I would find the baseball players and I would cut them out and I would like glue multiple pieces of paper together. And then I would like try to sell them as like these like vintage retro, like collage baseball cards. And then I just like did that all the time. And I eventually made my own money to buy cookies. And I even gave them out to some people, and so there's all these different moments like that, that I remember back. But I think when it comes to your question about creativity and social anxiety, well, I think one of the biggest things is, as my parents and as I got older, we kind of moved from the inner city to a pretty small town. And, it's a long story, but this super small town, let's just say had no any kind of like racial diversity. And this was also in a time in America of post 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember being, all of a sudden being placed in this hostile environment where nobody physically looked like me, but then also I began to face all kinds of different, bullying and discrimination that really began, my onset of social anxiety. And so I didn't really have that many friends. I was always by myself. And so when it comes to creativity, I started to go to like my library and I started to use the computer and I started to get online. And this was also the time where like really the internet and all these websites were sort of becoming a thing in social media.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started to sort of, experiment and create random things online, whether it was different YouTube channels. Like I remember I had a YouTube channel in 2009 and all these different things. And at the time when I was doing it, I didn't really think about it. But now that I think about it, it's like, wow, I was just like some kid who was just lonely and bored and poor and was basically trying to figure out like, how do I be social? How do I connect with other people? How do I do things that are fun? And so at the time, I didn't think anything of it. At the time, I actually thought I was a loser because I was like, oh man, I'm like playing these video games and like this internet stuff is a fad and like nobody cares about this. And so, yeah, it's a really interesting time. And so I think a lot of the times like my creativity, however way it came out, was really just a coping mechanism to deal with anxiety and social anxiety at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. Like what you talk about is that your drive for creativity was very goal oriented. Like you wanted cookies, so you were creative, and so it's not. And you were lonely, so you used your creativity as a way to get out of that loneliness and connect with people in a creative way. Would that be fair? Like, did you ever just be creative? Were you ever artistic, like painting or drawing or anything like that?
Yeah, honestly, this is a great question. So there are times when I look back at my life where I was artistic. There are times where I look back on my life where I was musical, for example. But
Mhm.
then when my social anxiety started around the ages of like 9, 10, 11, all that stuff just left. And whether it was from people that made fun of me for it or people who would talk me out of it, all that stuff just left and I sort of dropped it. But I remember being a very, I don't know if talented is the right word. I remember being a very like talented and creative and artistic person. And then ever since social anxiety, it's just everything ended and it's just black and white.
Wow. Well, I mean, that aligns with the research that if you're in a negative frame of mind and obviously you were really struggling with insomnia and the bullying, it would be very difficult to be creative. Um, I wonder how much, so I don't know much about social anxiety. So maybe tell me a little bit more about the drive of social anxiety. Is it the fear of judgment of others? Is it the fear of showing yourself and being like made fun of because that was happening? Like, what is it? What is the driver of the anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all those things that you said, but really the way that I think about it is I kind of look at social anxiety as like this AI. It's like this algorithm in your brain between your
Mhm.
mind and your brain and your nervous system. And so basically the way to work is, I'm a kid and it's the night before school,
Mhm.
right? And so the algorithm would start and it would sort of start when I was trying to go to bed at night. And my mind would just start thinking like, oh, what are you going to say to this person tomorrow
Mhm.
if they
Mhm.
say this to you, or what happens if you do this? And just like
Mhm.
running like thousands of like simulations of like what could happen. And
Mhm.
then you wake up the next day and then you're probably really tired because you probably didn't sleep well. So then now like your brain and your mind, it's not really operating that well to start with.
Mhm.
And then, you walk into a scenario and like your mind, this algorithm is very, very anxious, like right when you're about to walk in somewhere, because there's
Mhm.
this initial moment of like, are people looking at you? What are they going to think of you? What if
Mhm.
someone judges you? How are they going to react? And
Yeah.
then you might sit down in your seat and then, there's all these different tricks that I call the algorithm does. One of which is like a cognitive bias called the spotlight effect,
Mhm.
where all of a sudden, like you'll feel like everybody's looking at you, even
Yeah.
though they're probably not. And so like you'll
Mhm.
sort of be sitting there in like a classroom, for example, and then your brain is like running all these little tricks and like all these little sort of like what I call an algorithmic sequence to
Mhm.
basically like create this reality where you suck, people are judging you.
Mhm.
And I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that whether that's true or not, it doesn't really matter, right? So a
Mhm.
lot of people who, have like long-term social anxiety, a lot of them have been through something similar to what I've been through in term whether it's bullying or discrimination, or they grew up in an environment where nobody looked like them, whether it was based on their skin color or their gender, or maybe they have a certain disability.
Mhm.
And really it's like this part of your mind that develops almost this perception, almost like you're wearing glasses, that
Mhm.
really just becomes your reality, where you're just constantly plunged in this cycle every day. And then what happens is, um, if this happens for long enough, then what happens is your body and your nervous system starts to trigger these certain biochemical reactions,
Mhm.
even if you're not really feeling socially anxious, right? So what
Mhm.
that means is like you walk into a classroom, you walk into a room, and let's say you're not even really anxious. Next thing you know, all of a sudden your heartbeat is going to start to race. All of a
Mhm.
sudden your throat is going to start to clench. You're going to start to sweat. You might start tapping your legs. You might sit in the back of the room. You might look down. You might not be able to make eye contact with other people. And so what happens is eventually it's like this algorithm that eventually really just strips you of your free will. So even
Mhm.
if you're not anxious, your body will trigger those
Mhm.
anxious responses. And
Mhm.
then if you are anxious, then your body will also trigger those responses. And personally for me, it led me to the point where, anytime anybody would talk to me, anytime anybody would want to try to talk to me, or anything revolving around me participating or speaking up, what would really happen is all of a sudden my nervous system would go into what we call fight or flight, which means all of a sudden your mind goes completely blank, your throat clenches, and you just don't know what to do. You freeze or you run away. And so that'll happen again and again and again. And it'll really lead you to the point where you can't really do anything about it. Like you're sort of stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And by far the worst part about this, Caroline, is that for the vast majority of people, especially when you're a kid experiencing this, you have no idea that this is even a thing. And so you think like, oh, I'm just stupid, or there's just like something wrong with me, or I'm not smart enough with these other people, I'm not talented enough. So then like what you do is, instead of realizing like, oh, social anxiety is a real thing, that's like a mental health, brain health condition, to, oh, this is my personality, oh, I guess this is just who I am.
Yeah.
And so I think that's like probably the worst part about it. And I know for me, I didn't even realize that this was a thing up
Mm-hmm.
until probably 18, even though I experienced it every single day, and it controlled almost every aspect of my behavior, if that makes
Wow.
sense.
Yeah, it does. And it sounds so paralyzing. It's that self-fulfilling prophecy, because you choke and then you think the next time, oh, I choked last time, so I'm going to choke this time. So it just becomes this, loop that you can't get out of. And what interests me about social anxiety, and this is what I wanted to confirm with you, is that it's a fear of judgment. Because when we talk about sharing our creative selves with the world, and whether that creativity is making a meal or like what you think about Disney shows or things like that, we fear so much other people's judgment. And I wonder if there's parallels between creativity and social anxiety, in that if we didn't care about how people perceived us, if we were able to wave that magic wand and that to happen, like how would that change things? Because when I think about your story, you went from being socially anxious, not being able to speak, being like severely bullied, and psychological trauma, I would call it from what I read, to like building a Minecraft server, to YouTube channels. Like, if you didn't care what people thought about you, how did you engage with those creative outlets? Because that's much more public than, talking to someone in class. I'm curious about that.
Yeah. So what's really interesting about that is, like, I remember when I first got online, like the state of the internet, nobody used your real first and last name. It was all usernames. So it'd be like, I remember mine was like swag this. It was like the weirdest like names ever. And so I remember for me, I actually didn't even tell anybody about it. Like I didn't tell anybody about what I was doing online,
Mhm.
except for maybe a couple people. And I remember, I think like I had early on, I had told some people, and they sort of like made fun of me and sort of dismissed it. But then what was interesting is, like, as the internet became more and more popular, by the time I was like 16, 17, and I started to like, have these Minecraft servers, and some of them became successful, then, I started to sort of see kind of like the rise in, people using it. And so it sort of became a little bit more cool, and it wasn't as, difficult for me to kind of share those things. But yeah, and what's interesting too is that I think a lot of the people who I meet today that I would even define as creatives, and maybe it's just because of who I am, but I've realized that a lot of them have social anxiety, or have had social anxiety in the past. And personally, for me, I think it's obviously it's a very debilitating, terrible condition that I don't wish on anybody. But I think if you're able to get to a point to where you're really able to recover and manage it in your life, then I think it also becomes like an unbelievable superpower. Because for me, what I went through every day of really my mind telling me like, oh, Mark, people are going to judge you. Everybody hates you. Don't talk, don't talk, don't talk. But then now I basically do the opposite, like every day for a living, as like a speaker and a
Yeah.
podcast host, as an author. And like a lot of people ask me like, oh, Mark, how do you post on social media? How are you so vulnerable? And it's like, for 10 years of my life, I had like my mind tell me, Mark, people are going to make fun of you. People are going to judge you. And I lived through that reality for over 10 years.
Mhm.
And I know that's not how I want to live my life anymore. And I know the
Mhm.
consequences of that. And they're much worse than sharing, than putting yourself
Mhm.
out there. And so I think a lot of the times, like, once you're able to get in front of it and really like recover and sort of manage it in your lifestyle, then I think for a lot of people, it can even be a strength that you can use
Mhm.
to actually push yourself out there and be creative and perform. And so, yeah, I definitely think that for me, like the whole anonymity and the anonymous aspect of the internet definitely helped me, especially early on, because I didn't tell anybody about it.
Sounds like you created like this super alter ego that made you into this person that you didn't even realize you could be, which is someone that people respected and admired and liked. And like, I don't know. I mean, would it be fair to say that by engaging online and using your creativity in a space where you realize that people could like what you do and people could connect with you, that then you look back at, the people that were bullying you and being so terrible, be like, well, I didn't die. And really, who cares what they think anyway? Like, that's kind of where I don't know, I'm putting words to your story, but that's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yeah, so I mean, I think two things that come to mind are, when it comes to like the bullying and how I thought about it, to be honest with you, I didn't even know I was bullied. And what I realized is that when I was looking back at it, my mind had disassociated. And so I have so many memories I don't even have. Like I don't even, remember a lot of my childhood because my mind just disassociated through anxiety. And so for me, I never even realized that bullying could even affect me, to be honest with you. But deep at the psychological level, it was. And it really wasn't until like 2015 when I was 18 and I was actually suicidal to where I actually started to realize that bullying in my past had affected me. And up to that point, I had no idea. And so it wasn't really a conscious thing. I wish it was, but I think that's it. And then the other aspect in terms of what you said about the online alter ego, I think that's so interesting. And, so basically when I was a kid, when I was 16 and I had started this Minecraft server, long story short, it basically becomes like one of the top Minecraft servers in the world. Next thing you know, I have like millions of people on our site. We have like hundreds of thousands of registered users on our website, and it really just blows up. And I remember when that happened, that really kind of gave me any aspect of community that I kind of learned. And I remember like this one specific memory where like I was kind of like playing the game and there's like this in-game chat sort of system. And I remember some like random, I think it was like a girl somewhere, like a 13-year-old girl or something. I remember she was messaging me and she was basically like, my parents recently, like they're in the middle of a divorce and it's so stressful. And like, I go on this Minecraft server to play and have fun and connect with other people. And so I remember when that happened, I was just like, maybe this is kind of something bigger. And as it sort of like, grew and I started to make money from it and I started to gain all kinds of, social status. I think two things happened. I think one is it definitely kind of showed me what was possible in the world, and especially with the internet and exponential technologies and to reach potentially millions of people around the world. But then what was also interesting too is that I started to make money from it. I started to make like hundreds of thousands of dollars from it. And again, like at that time I was poor. And so when that happened, it was obviously great because I was able to change my socioeconomic status as well as my family's, but it was also very confusing and also quite hopeless as well, because prior to that moment, my definition of success and like happiness was all based on money and all based on physical possessions and like this concept of the American dream
and cookies.
And cookies, right? Exactly. No, perfect. And when I reached that point to where I was basically able to afford whatever I wanted, and I, did all kinds of things with that money, it didn't make me any happier. And it really kind of confused me. And I was like, wait, I sort of did what society told me. I like made money doing something that I actually enjoyed doing, but yet deep down inside of myself, I'm still the same loser. I still can't talk to people. I'm not confident. I have all these issues with energy and motivation and stress and focus. And so for me, it was very confusing. And it really led me to this moment where I just didn't know what to do with my life. And I was very hopeless. And I felt like I was the only one sort of going through it. And so it was definitely very great, obviously, because it showed me what was possible. And I'm glad I went through it. But it was also very interesting because it really enabled me to go through this really challenging time where I was like, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And so it was very, very interesting, to say the least.
Oh, cool. Thank you for sharing that. That's fascinating. For anybody joining us, I'm speaking to Mark Metry, who is an author, podcaster, entrepreneur. We're talking about social anxiety, which is what his best-selling book is about, Screw Being Shy, and about creativity and how those two intersect. And we have some great comments coming in here, Mark. So let me see. So creativity is a coping mechanism. Cool. Rose says, yes, exactly. Someone wants to know, did you remember anything they did that was helpful?
My parents.
I'm thinking it's about your parents. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I see here. It says, what did your parents do
Oh,
or
yeah.
say?
Yeah.
So it's interesting, right? So I think one of the most interesting things about social anxiety is that when it's first happening to you, like around the ages of 9 to 13, that's usually when the seed is planted. And you're an attentive parent, you can almost kind of see it's almost like a turtle going into its shell. But a lot of the times too, what happens is kind of going back to like this whole social anxiety algorithm that I talked to you about at the beginning. What eventually happens is that it eventually goes to your family and the closest people around you. So it's not just about people in school or trying to hide yourself. If it eventually goes to your family and your friends, and it's really like this, I think of it as sort of a virus. It's sort of like this all-encompassing virus that gets worse and worse and worse. And so I do remember there was a moment where I don't know what happened, but I remember my parents, they went to our school and they sort of like reported or something happened. And I remember sitting down with like a guidance counselor and like a teacher, and nothing happened, and there were other moments where, like you mentioned before we got on this call about, people stealing my stuff and vandalizing it. Also, nothing happened, and so I wasn't really helped by other people, which kind of sucks. To say, but I also think it helped me in the long term. What I would say what my parents did do that was helpful was it was when I was 18. And it was kind of like I went through this whole thing of being suicidal and depressed, and I was obese and I was socially isolating myself. And this whole period, I remember one thing that they did do at that time was when I was 18, they told me, and I'm not going to get into it, but we kind of had this conflict, and they basically told me, like, Mark, no matter what you do, no matter who you are, you will always be our son and we will always love you. And I remember when they told me that, which I don't really remember hearing early on, or at least not remembering it. I think that really changed my life, and it really, really helped me for sure. So I think that's one thing that my parents said. And of course, like, my parents were always helpful. They always wished me the best. They always tried to work hard for me. But I think a lot of the times too, like, what I've learned is that if you're a parent yourself and you have a kid who's going through this, yeah, there are a lot of things that you can do. But a lot of the times, like, even if you're the best parent, there's only so much you can do for your kid. And so I definitely think that's worth saying, if that answers the question.
Yeah. The person says thanks. It's just coming up as LinkedIn user, so I don't know if it's the same person, but they're saying thanks. So I can definitely relate to that. I'm a mom of 2 teenage boys right now, and please tell me they're not going to be ruined for life because they game all the time.
No, I mean, I think video games, it's very like, here's what I would say. Video games is the best technology that we currently have that puts someone's brain into a state of flow, which really is the present moment. And so I think a lot of the times, like, kids are jacked into this flow highway because they're trying to experience life. And so I don't necessarily think video games are inherently bad, but I think, like everything, if it's done too much, it can definitely be a bad thing. And I think also too, like, it's also worth noting, like, in 2021, and depending on like where you live, if you're still quarantined, if you're not, whatever the situation is for you, it's also worth noting, like, also in my case with social anxiety, like, I was getting like my social needs to the degree that I was through video games. Obviously, they probably wasn't the best, but that's definitely worth noting, because I interviewed this video game psychologist once on my podcast, and we talked all about this, and she kind of said how if you have a kid who's playing a video game, and if they're in the middle of a game and you remove the video game out, or if you pull the plug or whatever, parents will do to try to manage this issue, that's almost like an alcohol, like you taking a drink from an alcoholic, or like someone who's smoking. Obviously that's not going to work, and so it's sort of a similar thing, but yeah, I don't think video games are super bad. And even depending on the video game too, I also think there could even be certain benefits, depending on the person. So Definitely
Yeah, my
depends.
son,
It's definitely
yeah,
a nuance.
my son plays Roblox a lot, and when he goes, he does a
Mm,
lot of creative, like he sells his skins and things like that.
nice.
But like he'd be on there for 20 hours a day if we didn't, it's kind of, he's got ADHD too, so there's a whole dopamine thing going on there. But yeah, so I am torn with that, and especially like you said during the pandemic, it was a way for them to connect with their friends, so we were a lot more lax about it. But yeah, I'm torn. Like I don't think they're the worst things ever, but sometimes I don't like the way they act after they come off them, or that they just can't stop, right? Because I say, don't feel bad that you are addicted to them, because they spend millions of dollars to make sure they're addictive.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that's an interesting point though, like you said, Mark, about your experience, is how the online world helped you get out of a little bit this social anxiety and build connections and community, to see how good that could be and that it's possible for you. So there's definitely some upsides. So yeah, we're speaking with Mark Metry. I've got his website here where you can find out more about his work and his book and his coaching. I would love to talk. We talked a little bit about meditation before, just really
Mm.
quickly. So tell me, I listened to one of your podcasts about your meditation practice and how you've been using that to help increase your focus. So maybe tell me a little bit about your meditation journey and what you found has helpful for that, and if it's helped your creativity as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, for me, when I was, in the middle of like transforming my life, I was reading all these books, right? And so many of these books mention meditation. And I remember I had always just sort of thought like, oh, meditation is just for hippies or people, who are bored and lazy. And I remember it wasn't really until I remember it was Halloween in 2016. And I
Okay.
remember the day before I was kind of at this Halloween party and I kind of got, lit and it was kind of hungover. And then the next day, I had to like wake up kind of early because I was going on this trip with my friends. And so I remember like waking up kind of like feeling miserable and then just like sitting on this bus for like an hour and a half. And I remember just sitting there and being like, what am I going to do for an hour and a half? And I remember sort of being like, you know what? Let me try to like look into this. And I remember going on the App Store and downloading Headspace and meditating. And I remember I meditated for like the 10, 12 minutes or however long the first one is. And what was interesting is that I don't know if I fell asleep, but it was definitely very calming. And I remember I didn't really notice that big of a benefit or anything really that much later. And I just stuck with it for like 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was meditating for 2 weeks ongoing, what really happened was I think my life got a lot more confusing. And basically what I mean by that is that I started to really even question like who I was. I started to question what I was motivated by. I started to question my life itself, different like constructs in society. And now knowing what I know, what I was really doing is I think one of the biggest tools of meditation is that it really teaches you who you are and who you could be. Because if you remember back to earlier this conversation when I was kind of talking to you about when you're in the middle of social anxiety, and especially if you were never educated or taught that social anxiety is real, you just
Mm-hmm.
think that's you, right? And so for me, when I started to meditate, and I think I just kind of did like some form of guided meditation or mindfulness meditation, and I would meditate, I'd close my eyes and I'd focus on my breath, and then my brain would give me all these different thoughts. And eventually after those 2 weeks, I started to form like this distinction between in myself. And what would happen is I'd basically, my brain would give me a thought and and then sort of a different part of my mind would come in and be like, wait, why did you just think that? Like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
really think that. And basically what that did is it really taught me in real time that I am not my thoughts and I am
Mm-hmm.
not my social anxiety. And so eventually what happened is I started to really what I would say is like my identity became, I don't know what the word is, but it sort of diverged into the
Mm-hmm.
social anxiety me that was sort of being kidnapped and held hostage for 10 years versus the real me. And then also too, what began to happen was I remember also too, like I went to this party, and this, let's just say it wasn't the best like college party with the best influences. And I remember going to this party and I remember like stepping in for 3 minutes and I don't know, I don't know how to describe it, but it's almost like time froze. And I like started to look at all of these different people at the party, people playing beer pong, people smoking in the corner, people drinking this, people doing that, people doing that. And like literally what I saw was, It was almost like I saw mechanical puppets. Like, you know how like on an alarm clock, you know how like once it rings, there's like all of like these like birds that come out and they like do like these different movements, and like they're sort of puppets. I
Okay.
almost saw that with other people. And like what I mean by that is my brain started to tell me like, hey, Mark, like you probably shouldn't be in this environment. Like if you want to change, if you want to sort of do what you want to do, you need to change your environment. And so when I started meditating, it started to show me that in real time. And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, it was very scary. And now knowing what I know, you know, now what I know, it's called the highlighter effect, where
Mm-hmm.
basically what starts to happen is when you start to meditate and you really start to sort of know yourself, you start to calm and train your mind. What starts to happen is now your mind is highlighting all these things now in your life for deletion, for things that really probably shouldn't be in your life, but
Mm-hmm.
you have been in there and have been sort of reinforcing this identity that has kept your ego alive for years. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I love meditation. I do different kinds. I've taken different meditation courses. And yeah, I think meditation is by far probably one of the biggest things that helped me manage social anxiety. It really helped me focus. I really don't think I was able to focus on anything before I
Mm-hmm.
started to learn how to meditate,
Mm-hmm.
you know, calm down stress, but then also, you know, help me manage my identity and my ego and sort of just how I just like psychologically think about like the metaphysical reality of life. And so I definitely I'm a huge advocate for meditation. I know you are too, right? You meditate, or what's your practice?
Yeah, I do a Zazen meditation, which I picked up when I worked with my coach Kelsey Ramsden, and she took us to California. And I had been trying to meditate before, like with Headspace and some other techniques. I do Kundalini yoga
Mm.
occasionally, and but this fellow, Dr. Doug Brockman, he combines Zazen meditation with sniper rifle shooting, and it's kind of wacky, but it makes a lot of sense. If you've ever heard of Kyoto archery, which is like a meditative Japanese archery practice. It's a very much like the idea of the mind and the body. There is no body, there's no mind, it's all one. So it's kind of an integration. So I think you're really interested, and I'll
Wait,
follow up with
what is exact? What did you say? What kind of meditation? Exazen? What
Zazen.
is it? What
It's
is it?
Zed. Well, it's a Buddhist meditation, Zen meditation. It's Zazein or Zazein, I guess, for you Yanks. Um, and it's and there's groups here in Calgary, not with the sniper rifles, but they do. It's just style of Buddhist meditation, but it's open
Hmm.
eyed. And the reason
Oh.
I was introduced to it was because he works with mainly people who he calls driven, which are, I think it's mostly people with ADHD or people that are very driven with these specific characteristics. And his feeling is that when you close your eyes as a person who's driven, they're like 10% of the population who's like always on alert, always hunting, always protecting, that it's a threat. He believes in an eye open
Mm,
meditation. So anyway, I
mm.
can send you more information. It's super interesting. So I do that. It's just a
Yeah.
sitting practice. It's not guided. I just sit for 10 minutes a day and look at a 45-degree angle to the ground, and same thing, just collect my thoughts and be like, oh, there they go. And I've had the same benefits like you've described with that, the metacognition about the thinking about your thinking,
Mm.
which normally you're just stuck in the thinking, right? So what a gift, I think, for everybody to know.
Yeah.
And what do you think? So one of the things that I hear are the pitfalls people saying, especially for people, like you and I who are driven, type A, is they say, I'm a terrible meditator. I suck at it. I'm not used to sucking at something because I can't think about nothing. And the point of meditation is not to think about nothing. It's to catch your thoughts and bring them back to the present moment. That is actually the practice of meditation. Is that fair to say for you as well?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think there's many different forms of meditation, and it depends. But yeah, I totally think you're right, and I think that's the most common myth of like, oh, I'm a bad meditator because when I sit to meditate, I overthink. Well, it's like, yeah, that's like literally the point. Like
Yeah,
literally, that's like
exactly.
literally the point. And
Yeah.
I think as sort of meditation has become, sort of mainstream, we definitely, at least I definitely feel like I have to, dispel some myths of meditation because I knew so many myths about meditation before I started meditating, and it stopped me, and meditation is a practice that I can't imagine my life without. And I try to do it every single day. And so I just wonder how many other like younger versions of me are out there who are not meditating. And yeah, that's that practice of the, of the open meditation. That sounds so interesting. I think I heard about that from this guy named Don Jose Ruiz, who I had on my podcast a while back. And I don't know if, I don't think it's the same thing, but I know for me, like in the times where I'm really busy and I have to like go drive somewhere, or I just like go for a walk and I don't have time to meditate, I do this thing called a peripheral wide-eyed gaze. I don't know if it's the same thing, but basically what I do is like I kind of same thing. Like I focus on my breath. I take deep breaths, mindful breath. But then what I do is I try to look ahead of me, and I don't change my center. But what I do is I just like slowly relax. And if you do that, then your eyes will sort of like relax. And instead of just looking in front of you, you'll see like your entire peripheral. And like, we know that like for example, like your eyes are actually like a part of your brain. They're connected to your central nervous system. And so when you have that peripheral wide-eyed gaze, it completely relaxes your body and it makes you much more mindful. So sometimes I do that, but I'll definitely have to look into the one that you said, and the sniper rifles. Whoa.
Yeah, I can send you the link. I think it's drdogbrackman.com. But yeah, no, I love that. I hope you're okay for time, because I'm
not good for time.
Okay, so I just loving this conversation, and that wide-eyed or the peripheral vision thing, I've done that as part of a different practice, which is a book. I forget the name. Is it Dan Siegel who wrote Mindsight? Yeah, so he talks about that. Yeah, he talks about that, like doing the hearing something, seeing something with that peripheral. So I love that tip. I'm going to try that when I don't have the time, or I'm like got 5 minutes before an appointment, that I can just do that. So thank you. So I have 2 more questions quickly, but of course I'm not going to forget the dare. I have 1 more question and then your dare. I love that you chose the dare. Not many people do. What would you say, just like quickly, to tell someone who wants to create something, who's feeling like you were as a kid, who doesn't feel creative, who doesn't want to send something out into the world, is worried about what people think, maybe not necessarily with social anxiety? What would you tell them to do to get them started?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think for me, when I look back at my past, one of the things that I'm very thankful for is that I did terrible in school and mostly everything else. I got bad grades, didn't play any sports, wasn't a part of any clubs, wasn't any of these arts and crafts, drama groups, nothing like that. And so for me, my mindset was like, oh, I'm a failure. And so for me, I think that also became a superpower, because I was like, you know what? If I'm a failure, let me just like mess around and like experiment with random things. And so I think a lot of people who, have trouble sort of starting things and it sort of jump and being creative, is that they are overthinking it. They're like, oh, if I do this, then I have to do that and that. And again, everyone's different. But I think for me, what really helped is that all these things that I started in my life that became successful, whether it was my podcast or way back in the day, my Minecraft server, I like literally didn't think twice about these things. I was literally like, one day I was like, hey, you know what? Screw it. Let me start this thing. I didn't even put that much effort into it. Not even that much planning. I was like, all right, I'm going to do this, that. And so I think the biggest tip that I can say is that you should definitely try to fail forward and like, don't overthink it. And I think honestly, the quicker that you can do something, the less your mind has the ability to build psychological barriers, which then you eventually talk yourself out of it. And so I think doing things very quickly, not overthinking them, is a superpower, generally speaking, and can really help those kinds of people.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Like not like waiting till it's perfect to release it. I always think of that quote with creativity, which is true, to separate divergent and convergent. So when you're like, you need to just stop editing your ideas. And I love the idea to just do it quickly. But there's a quote supposedly by Hemingway that's write drunk, edit sober. So
I love that. I have to write that down.
Yeah, it's like a total, a metaphor for creativity. So, okay. So finally, your dare. So I always ask people to share a truth or a dare. Your dare for today. I've been speaking with Mark Metry, by the way, today. An amazing conversation about social anxiety, whether you experience it, whether you're a parent, you want to learn some strategies and how it interacts with creativity. It's been an amazing conversation. But your dare for today, Mark, is I want you to tell me what you did last weekend, but you have to tell me in Pig Latin.
I don't even like how do I do that?
So Pig Latin. So if you say hello, you have to take the H off the front, and it's Elohe. So you have to take off the first letter of the word and put it at the end.
Of every word?
Every word. Do what you can. Don't overthink it. Just take your own advice. You don't have to say like a whole long story. Just give it a try. See if you can do it.
I don't even. Okay, let me try. I'm kind of confused, but
okay. So if I were going to say, "Hi, Mark, welcome," it would be "I hey, Ark May, Elcom way."
Oh man, talk about a brain exercise. Okay,
I know, right? I know. That's why I picked it for you. I know you can handle it.
What about like I?
Then
like
you
the
put
letter,
way
like,
at the end. So if it's like aardvark, it's aardvark way. I did Google this before I gave you the dare, so I knew what I was talking about.
Okay. I a o go. I'm trying to say I went to a Halloween party with my girlfriend
so I
dressed as
went
Batman.
would be like I weigh, ent way. Now you continue.
I weigh, and weigh.
So 2 would be ote.
Ote. Arty. Wait, what would be a party?
Party?
Arty? Yeah.
No, so you take the P off. So you start with
Okay.
arty, pay.
Arty, pay. Halloween, hey. Ostium, C, K. What the?
Austin K. Austin K.
Okay. Atman, B, or Bay.
Bay?
Batman. I'm trying to say
Oh,
Batman.
Batman. So Batman would be Atman Bay. Yeah.
Atman Bay. Okay, there we go.
Woo! Yay! You did
Man,
it.
honestly, that stressed me out so much. I'm so confused. I'm like sweating now. Oh my god.
You've done all these things, and Pig Latin is what, like, is the thing that trips you up. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for participating. This was a fantastic interview. I learned so much as a parent, but also just learning about social anxiety and creativity. And you can find Mark at his website, markmetry.com, or find him on LinkedIn. That's where I found him. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining me. I had such a good time.
Yeah, Caroline, you're awesome. And yeah, I appreciate everyone out there for watching and listening. This was so fun.
Thank you so much.